There were times when I looked at my reporting and wondered, whether the sprawling story with all these wild characters could possibly be true. I found really more than I ever imagined I would. In July of 2010, Karen King, who is this very prominent professor of religious history at Harvard, receives an email from a private collector of manuscripts she has never heard of before. And this man tells her that he has some interesting papyri. Among them is one in which there appears to be this partial phrase, Jesus said to them, my wife. This is clearly a bombshell of a papyrus. At stake for the Catholic Church in all of this is centuries of tradition. To be a priest, celibacy is required because celibacy, in their view, is how you turn away from the world and towards God. The Vatican wasted no time in calling it an inept forgery, but what ended up happening in the days afterwards was that independent scholars started taking a closer look at this manuscript and were starting to find things that made them suspicious. There was this one sort of area or line of investigation that no one had ever really looked at deeply, and that was the question of provenance. And provenance is sort of a fancy way of saying, where does an object come from? What are its origins? Who are the chain of owners that had this object? Who took it out of the ground initially? Who owned it before it came to Karen King? And as far as I could tell, Karen King herself had made no independent investigation of that. She took the owner's word, more or less, and that's kind of where she leaves it. 3 years after the story first breaks, I decide to start digging and not really sure what I'm going to find because, I figured after 3 years, the ground had probably been so heavily raked over that if there was anything explosive to learn about the owner, who he was, we would have already heard about it. I found that was absolutely not the case. I started doing what journalists do all the time, digging through public records. I started cultivating sources, following one lead to another, often encountering dead ends, but ultimately discovering this really wild tale about the owner, not only identifying the owner, but meeting with him and finding that he was this very complex, fascinating figure whose life intersected with the worlds of Egyptology, with the worlds of porn, who had kind of popped up almost Zelig-like in a million different places. When I first called him during my first trip to Florida in November, he denied everything. He denied being the owner, he denied ever studying at the Free University. He denied really having anything more than a passing relationship with the previous owner, knew really nothing about anything. So it took my going to Germany and compiling basically a kind of dossier on him, and then calling him back months later and saying, hey, this is what I found, now can we talk? Then all of a sudden he becomes very, very open, and we have something like a total of 22 hours of conversations about the papyrus and about his own history. Now you're learning that the owner is not this hapless collector who doesn't read Coptic and has stumbled upon this document and doesn't really know what it is, but he actually was a former student of Coptic who's very, very well read in Christian history, he's very, very well read in ancient history, and when he acknowledged to me that he had lied to Karen King about certain details. It's one thing to lie to a reporter, it's another thing to lie to a Harvard professor who you are asking to introduce your papyrus to the world. Whether the Gospel of Jesus' wife itself is authentic or not, I think will remain an open question. We need more scientific testing. Perhaps we need an eyewitness to a forgery, or we need a confession from somebody. But what I found in the course of my reporting was that the provenance story, the story of where the owner said he acquired the papyrus, who he acquired it from, I believe, based on my reporting, that those are false, and that story does not hold water. I just think it shows that with a little bit of scholarly training, with an ability to read people, with an ability to identify the right kind of mark, and to understand precisely what it is they want, you can get away with almost anything.